How does an empire end? I'm Daniel R. Jennings, and today I'm going to answer that question for you. In 1976, Sir John Glubb published an extensive study of empires throughout history, in which he had looked at empires like the Assyrian, Persian, Greek, Roman, Arab, Mameluke, Ottoman, Spanish, Romanov, and British empires, and he made an amazing discovery. He discovered that throughout history, it didn't matter what part of the world they were in, what their religion was, what the people were like there. All empires go through about 6 of the same stages from beginning to end. And he also discovered that the average life expectancy for an empire is about 250 years. And we want to look at those very quickly today with an emphasis on how an empire actually collapses. But just to go over these stages from beginning up until the end quickly, an empire usually begins with what he referred to as an age of conquest, in which a smaller group of people, a tribe, or a nation begins to aggressively expand out, conquering other countries and other tribes and other peoples, effectively or essentially expanding their country. Well, this naturally leads to an age of commerce, because with the natural resources and the businesses that have been conquered in from the other countries, it actually creates an environment for the increase of commerce, because when you're not tied down by import and export tariffs and things of that nature, it's actually easier to grow your business. So the larger a country is, the easier it is to have commerce in that country. The age of commerce naturally enters into a phase of an age of wealth, because with all the success and prosperity in commerce, that naturally brings with it wealth. The age of wealth is eventually supplanted by an age of intellect, in which research and education and scientific discovery becomes a big emphasis for the nation. And when we look back at this phase in previous empires, we see that great scientific advances have been made during those time periods. Well, the age of intellect eventually phases into an age of decadence. An age of decadence ultimately phases into the collapse of the nation. And that's what we want to look at today. We want to look at this age of decadence, because when we look at Sir Glubb's research and we compare it to what we're seeing in the United States, everything that he saw in other countries, the United States has followed the same pattern, and it now appears to be entering into the transition phase from where it is transitioning from the age of intellect, with its emphasis on higher education and scientific research and the accompanying scientific discovery that came with that, and is transitioning into the age of decadence. So there are about 12 or 13 signs that a nation has entered into or is entering into an age of decadence. One of those is that there is a defensive attitude, or an attitude of defensiveness. And what that means is that the empire has gained all these resources, they've made all these scientific discoveries, they have conquered all these different colonies, or made all these different colonies, they have accumulated a lot of wealth, and they want to defend that. They don't want to lose that. So the emphasis becomes not so much on conquering new territory as it does on conserving their wealth, making sure that they don't lose that wealth. And I think that can probably take a number of different forms. One of those may be economic manipulation of other countries, so in such a way that it ultimately enables the empire to be on the top and the other countries to be on the bottom. And I think we see that sometimes in the United States, in the way that they deal with other countries. Another sign of entering into the age of decadence is an attitude of pessimism that kind of overtakes the country, in which people just kind of have a really negative opinion of their leaders, of society, of just the general direction that society is heading in. And I think, and we can see that as time goes on, the attitude in the United States, the opinion that we have of our leaders in Washington, D.C., just in general, people's attitude about everything is just becoming more and more pessimistic. We're becoming less and less hopeful, and we're beginning to develop more and more of a negative attitude about just the direction that things are going in our country. Another sign that an empire has entered into the age of decadence is an emphasis on materialism. What I mean by that is that a person's value and the emphasis of society becomes not on what they might do to make society a better place, but it becomes on the material things that they are able to amass. And a person is much more highly respected if he is a millionaire in the age of decadence than he is if he is a firefighter. But obviously firefighters do much more for a country than a person who just became a millionaire just from whatever way, in such a way that didn't help the country. But that's a sign of the age of decadence, in which people who don't really offer value to the society are viewed much higher just because they have more money than those who actually do provide a service to the country and actually do make it better. Those people are looked down upon because they don't have as much money. Another sign that an empire has entered into the age of decadence is that it is there's an air of frivolity, in the sense of that frivolous things are just really what is emphasized rather than things that actually contribute to society. And we can look at some examples. I mean, as a general rule, do people in the United States spend more money on movie tickets, concert tickets, sporting events tickets, and so forth, and more time attending these events and taking part in these things than they do in things that would be more beneficial to our society? Is more time spent on entertainment and more money spent on entertainment than it is on helping homeless people? Well, that's frivolity, and I think the sad truth is that our emphasis has become so much on frivolous things that we actually are overlooking areas that we really could be making more of a difference in our society. And that's not to say that entertainment is all bad, because it's good, it's refreshing, it's encouraging to have some entertainment. We don't want to condemn entertainment, in total. But when things become unbalanced and frivolity is the, frivolous things are the things that receive more emphasis than the needs that need to be met in our society, well, things are unbalanced and something's wrong there. Another sign that an empire has entered into an age of decadence is the increase in the number of people that want to come to that country. And that's not a criticism of those people, it's just an observation that when a country becomes prosperous, it attracts people that want to be a part of that prosperity. I mean, that's how we all are. If there was another country in the world that was much more prosperous than ours, Americans would want to go to that country. And it's the same way here. America is perhaps the most prosperous country in the world, and so it attracts people that want to come and naturally want to be a part of that prosperity. But that's usually an indicator. When that happens, it usually is an indicator that the empire is heading towards decline. Another instance or example of, or sign of an empire entering into the age of decline is that the number of welfare programs increase. And again, this is not a bad thing necessarily. Welfare programs are great. They help a lot of people. I've been helped by different welfare programs. I'm thankful for them, and I want them to continue. But historically, it's a sign that an age of decadence is marked by an increase in the number of welfare programs that exist. And again, I want to be very clear. I'm not criticizing welfare programs. I'm not criticizing people who are the recipients of them. But that is just a sign that an empire has entered into the age of decadence, because they have accumulated a lot of wealth, and then they're like, okay, well, how are we going to use this wealth? And that wealth ends up being metered out to help people that are less fortunate in the empire. Another sign that an empire is heading towards collapse is the weakening of religion. What I mean by that is that historically religion is has a tendency to be kind of have a restraining effect on society. The religion, whatever the religion may be, it doesn't necessarily have to be Christianity. If you look at history, different religions all preach the natural law that is evident to everyone. And so, that has the effect of restraining society and encouraging it to live by God's natural law that is written on everyone's heart. But as an empire heads to decline, that role that religion plays begins to become weaker and weaker and weaker. And I think that we clearly see that today, even though the church still does make an influence, or have an influence in the United States. It's nowhere near as influential as it was maybe 60, 70 years ago. Another sign that an empire is heading for collapse that Sir Glove discovered was that there would always be a push for the independence of women and a push for women to take more of a leading role in society. There would also be a kind of a cult of celebrity in which the important people in the society were celebrities. Not necessarily the people that actually do anything good for the country, not the political leaders, not the soldiers, not the policemen, not the firemen, but celebrities are the people that get the attention and that are considered to be the important people. There would also be, Sir Glove discovered, a period of, or an atmosphere of civil dissension. What that means is that people on opposing political sides, as the empire heads towards collapse, they dig their heels in a way greater than they ever had before, and they just entrench themselves in their positions in political contests, elections. They just become so heated and so debated, and there's so much antagonism and really hatred and mean-spiritedness between the two parties. That just gets worse as an empire heads towards collapse. And that's exactly what we've seen in last of the several presidential elections, in which the people on both sides of the major parties have adopted just a much more angry and aggressive tone towards the people on the other side. The collapse of an empire in the age of decadence is also marked by things like widespread immorality, the increase in the love of money, the loss of a sense of duty in which people don't feel that it's their responsibility to make their country a better place. It's somebody else's job. We'll let somebody else take care of those problems. When it's really everybody's responsibility. And finally, selfishness. So when you see all those indicators, which we see all of them in the United States today, that is an indicator that the empire is heading towards collapse. And a lot of people that make the mistake, they say, well, if an empire collapses, it doesn't exist anymore. That couldn't be further from the truth. When an empire collapses, it still exists. The same people still live there. It still goes by the same name, a lot of times. It still has a lot of the same culture. It's just nowhere near as powerful and as influential as it was before. It basically loses the power and the authority that it had. It kind of goes up and crescendos and goes down. But it still exists. And so, really, as we look at these things, we can ask the question, a lot of people are really, we're talking about America. A lot of people are realizing America is not as great as it was before, and a lot of people want to see it become great again. And I think everybody who lives here wants that. But the reality is that the United States is following the same pattern that so many other empires have also followed, and those all collapsed. So the reality is the United States will, one day, unless God drastically alters history, and He hasn't done it for any other nation, it's going to collapse. And so the question is, and we're headed in that direction. The question is, should we be worried about that? And the answer is no. Because the fact that all of these empires have, in the past, Again, Sir Glubb looked at the Assyrian, the Persian, the Greek, the Roman, the Arab, the Mameluke, the Ottoman, the Spanish, the Romanov, and the British empires. They all went down the same path that the United States is going down. They all ended in the same way that the United States will end, aside from some major, drastic change to history, unlike anything that's ever happened before. They all ended up collapsing. And what that is an indicator of is that there is a higher power, that God is, the God who created this universe, who created this world. He is guiding the affairs of the empires. He's guiding the affairs of the United States just the same way that he guided the affairs of all those other historical empires. And so the encouragement that we can have is that, well, if God is, guiding the United States into its collapse, which all the signs would indicate that he is, it's okay, because God has a plan and a purpose for that, and and we're in good hands if that's the case. And really, what that should help us focus on is that our stability does not come from the nation that we live in. Our stability comes from God. He is our source of strength. He is our source of hope. He is our source of stability. All that comes from God. It doesn't come from our nation. Nations rise and nations fall, and that teaches us that nations are imperfect and fallible and are not invincible. But God never rises and then falls. God only is risen, and he is there, and he will never fall. He'll always be there. So your stability shouldn't come from your country. Your stability should come from your relationship with God. And so as we look at how empires, we've seen how empires begin, we've seen how they climax, we've seen how they end. Empires do end, but our emphasis should not be on our country. Our emphasis should be on God and his plan for us as a personal, in our personal lives, and everything else is just irrespective of that. I'm Daniel R. Jennings, and this is another life lesson.